Hello everyone, welcome to the course Disability Studies in India, Historical, Social and Culture Perspectives. So, in this module we are talking about Indian myth, stereotypes, language and representation. So, in the first three lectures what we tried to cover how myth, which is considered to be the collective consciousness of the people, have treated people with disability. And then we move to the idea of a language. Language simply means that how language not only reflect the reality, but also constitute the reality, construct the reality, and I am sure that in the previous lecture we talked about it in a great extension to that, and then we also tried to challenge certain stereotypes that we have about people with disability. For example, they are sexual or they are asexual or they are hypersexual, or they are not capable of doing something, or they have limitations. So, we also looked at from medical and social model point of view that whether they have limitations or it is socially imposed limitations, right. So, when we talked about myth, I tried to cover it up. Obviously, I did not touch upon other particular religions because I am not well versed in Islam and Christianity, but since I have read Hinduism and I know many important epic mythical figure who constantly come into our consciousness. So, it is my humble request that if I have not touched upon other religion does not mean there are no myths available on disability. Your job is to explore those religions, your job is to explore those cultures, your job is to explore those communities where the myths are explaining, talking about people with disability. Pick up some particular character and see what they have to say about people with disability. Second thing is, which I think I have not told you, but I am going to tell you this time, that sometime what happens that most of us when we think about disability, we always go for impaired body, but trust me, you can get to know more how people with disabilities are treated and what are the concepts associated with people with disability, how they are produced. We can know these ideas through other bodies, let us say masculine bodies, right. For example, I also explored what is masculinity when I was talking about norms like in the previous module, right. So, what my concern is here, when you are examining it, when you are opening it, when you are looking at it, people with disabilities, discourse around people with disabilities, you must also examine how normal people, so called able people are treated, because they are also very important site to know about people with disabilities. So, moving ahead, what we discussed in the previous lecture, I am sure that you remember it. So, now moving ahead, I am going to talk today about disability and representation in the Indian context. So, in this lecture, when I am going to talk about disability and representation in the Indian context, two things you must remember. One, I am not going to talk about representation in terms of Western media or popular media or literature or films, right. I am not going to see that. Why? Because there is a separate module where I am going to discuss these things. In this module, I am going to talk about what are understanding, description, views about people with disabilities in different religions. So, when I am saying India, like when I am saying India, obviously India is a very vast country, they have many religions. So, if I leave something out, this is my limitations. Obviously, I cannot cover all things in one lecture or in one module. It's just a kind of giving you a sense and giving you an idea how we can think about people with disability from looking at other religions, other communities, other cultures, other perspectives. All right. So, keeping this in mind, let us first reflect and give a kind of thinking how people with disabilities are treated or how they have been understood in different religions. So, we have, let us say for example, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam and Jainism, and there are other religions as well, but I have just picked up so called dominant or which one is mainly practiced by many Indians, all right. So, but as I have already told you about the limitations of my lectures, and I am sure that you will keep this in mind when you are reading it, and you can pick up one particular point and explore in your research. All right. So, let us go to the slide number 1. So, here you see the first slide. What is talking about? This is talking about that disability has long been a complex and multifaceted subject across cultures and societies, and the Indian subcontinent is no exception. The way disability is represented and understood in Indian religions, for example, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, right? As you know, like Sikhism is mainly very prevalent in Punjab areas and other places as well. So, they shape cultural attitudes, social structure and the lived experiences of people with disability. While each religion has its unique set of philosophies, practices, there are common thread in how disability is conceptualized, from divine perfection and suffering to purity, transcendence and inclusion. At the core of many religious teaching is the notion of human perfection, right? Suffering, path of spiritual liberation, karma, samskara and all that, right. So I mean, you can read the slides, but the point what I wanted to explain to you by showing these slides, the one is that when we are looking at disability, right, when we are examining disability, and religion has a very, very important role in shaping our attitudes, right. Let me give you an example easily so that you can understand. For example, there are set of people, they like to eat vegetarian foods. There are set of people who likes to eat non-vegetarian food, right. Here you see that how is it possible, right. It is not something natural that you are born with that quality that you will never like. It is more about the religion, the culture, the community you are born with. So, this idea makes us to understand that religion shapes our cultural attitudes. Religion shape our belief. Religion shape our notion about the world, and religion has a very important role in producing the knowledge and truth. All right. So, when we are talking about it, and that is why I say religion shapes our cultural attitudes, religion shapes our beliefs. So, they also shape our philosophy to look at people with disability, but depends what religion has discussed, what that particular religion has to say about people with disability. Let us say for example, as I was talking in the previous lecture that in Anita Ghai's book Rethinking Disability, that most of people think that people with disability who are born as a disabled people, they are result of their karma which they did in the past, and they are being punished in this particular life, and that is why they are living such a particular life, right. So, this is a one particular dominant trait we have about people with disability, that when we see people with disability, how we see that? Okay, he has done something bad, right? That is why he is being punished, right? He did something very bad in the past. That is why this is happening with him, right? But why I am talking about this? I am talking about this because to give you an idea that how people with disabilities are understood in one particular section or one particular community, but one has to really go deep to know what that religion has to say about people with disabilities, right. Let us say for example, you cannot get it just by looking at what it has to be, what it is said about people with disability. You have to understand that what that religion has to say about humanity, what that religion has to say about people, lives, nature, culture, how they are suggesting us to live, how they are suggesting us not to live. That is very important, not to live, because then only we can infer, because most of us have very narrow understanding, and what we do, we just see how characters are treated. No, that is not the point to look at, to understand disability in particular religion. To look at religion, so treatment towards people with disability is to see other component associated with people with disability. For example, as I reiterated, what it says about compassion, right? What it has to say about pity, what it has to say about sympathy, what it has to say about emotions, what it has to say about other associated phenomena that shape the very understanding of people with disability, right. So, this is all the important phenomena, they are related to bodies, to nature. So, let us say for example, if a one particular religion is suggest that we should treat everyone equally, right. It does not mean anywhere that people with disabilities are excluded in that sermon or that preaching or in that dictates, right. So, if it says that we should treat everyone equally, it means that it asking that even people with disabilities should be treated equally. So, you have to get into that kind of a deeper understanding to know what religion has to say. All right, let us go to the next slide to see what other religion has to talk about. So, for example, in your slide if you see Hindu cosmology, right. Hindu cosmology, if you look at it, the gods themselves are not immune to flaws. See, this is the point, right. Gods are not immune to flaws and perfection, which means even gods are flawed, right. They are not perfect. They are not perfect. There are several deities and mythological figures who are depicted with disability or physical impairments. Let us say for example, the god Ganesha, right, widely worshipped as the remover of obstacles, is depicted with a head of elephant after his original human head was removed in a fit of rage by his father Lord Shiva. So, here you see Ganesha is talking about, right. So, Lord Shiva's story symbolizes a theme of a loss, right. What this story is about? This story is symbolizing the theme of a loss and renewal, right, suggesting that disability is not a limitation, but an opportunity for transformation. Similarly, Lord Krishna, one of the most revered deities in Hinduism, is often depicted as a playful, charming figure who is known to be physically imperfect, having a limp as a result of his battles. So, this depiction invite believers to recognize that divinity and imperfections are not mutually exclusive, right. So, why I am talking about this examples, let us say Lord Shiva, Ganesha, but again as I have discussed when I was talking about the terms, right, accessibility, deformity, disease, other important concept which I discussed in my previous lectures, which means in the first and second module when I was talking about, I told you that disability is not deformity, right. This is a very misunderstanding that we have, that disabled people are deformed people or deformed people are disabled people, but I am obviously drawing the line between disability and deformity will be injustice, not good to say this, that there is a problem, right. There is a problem, methodological problem in understanding and analyzing it. So, here Lord Ganesha, when I picked up this example, I am pretty aware that Lord Ganesha is not disabled, like he is, but obviously medically he is deformed one, like who has elephant head, man, is a monster basically, like imagine you see a man with animal's head is a kind of a monster. I mean, medically examining, I have absolutely no problem with body marked with differences, because it is a natural, like I have been talking about, we have discussed already about human diversity. But okay, so when we come to this idea, okay, why then I picked up this example of Lord Ganesha? The reason I picked it up, like in Hindu cosmologies, this example showed to you that even animal, one way to interpret it, animal and man, they go together. There is no distinction between animal and man, right. It depends how we look at it. So, they are also part of nature, humans are also part of nature. So, we should believe not discriminating, we should believe not exclusionary practices, we should believe in non-hierarchical, unlike certain philosophical trend that we see in the West, the great chain of being. And if you see Gadamer and other people are saying that God is on the top, then man, then animal, then plant, and then non-living object, so on and so forth. So, there is a hierarchy established. which you will not find in India. And if you do not find in Indian philosophy, Hinduism or any particular religions, if you do not find this, how can you say that people with disabilities are treated as minor or as a deformed character who must not be treated positively, right? This is what you will not find it. So, what I am giving an example that here you have a mythical figure, where you have a gods who are worshipped, and this is more about transformation, right? In fact, I do not want to go in details. I wish I could talk more on body and Indian philosophy, right? Because in Indian philosophy, body is, has a very different meaning altogether. It does not limit it by making a two binary ability and disability, but obviously nowadays after the colonial times, as everything has changed, our way of interpreting, our way of looking, our way of treatment has also changed. So, they have appropriated our way of approaching bodies, right. So, keeping this in mind, right, keeping this context in mind, then this is more about transformation. Imperfection is not important, right. Imperfection is absolutely not given due advantage. Okay, we are talking about imperfection. No, imperfection is not treated as imperfection. It's more about transformation. It's more about diversity. It's about renewal, right? It's a renewal of the life. It's like giving new things to the life, right? So the point here is that there are many figures, right? Even there are many mythical figures that you can find in Indian context. All right. Let us go to the next slide just so to know more about it. So, for example, when we look at Buddhist thought, right, what it has to say about Buddhist thought. In Buddhist thought, disability is viewed through the lens of suffering, dukkha, and the human conditions. According to the Four Noble Truths, life is characterized by suffering, and the cessation of suffering can be attained through the Noble Eightfold Path. Right. So, Buddhism acknowledges that physical impairment is part of the broader experience of suffering, which is not inherently negative, but is an aspect of the process of spiritual enlightenment. The Buddha himself, while often portrayed as a figure of perfect enlightenment, was born into a world filled with physical and emotional suffering, including the suffering caused by disability. Buddhist teachings on the mindfulness, compassion, and interdependence. This is a key term, my dear students and friends. Remember this, that interdependence is a virtue, right? Not independence. That's my point. I have been vouching for this. Interdependence is a virtue. Independence is vice, is evil in a modern society, but unfortunately in modern society, you know that. So, Buddhist teaching on mindfulness, compassion, interdependence are key in shaping attitudes toward people with disabilities, emphasizing the importance of empathy, understanding, and inclusivity, right? Empathy, understanding, and inclusivity. So, here if you see that after Hinduism we move to the Buddhism, what Buddhism is talking about? Buddhism is talking about suffering, but suffering not particularly to people with disabilities. It's about entire world is suffering. They all are in pain. And I'm sure that you all know the Buddha's story, that he was living in a kingdom. At one point of time, he came out of his kingdom, and then he wanted to see the people around, and then he saw some people who are suffering. So, it's not that he saw people with disabilities suffering, right? It's not like only people with disability suffer. Obviously, there are many people who suffer. It depends what kind of suffering they have. So, the key theme is suffering in Buddhism philosophy, right? And then he decided he will not live in the kingdom and all that, and he left the throne and he started moving. So, the point is this, that karuna is what is preached by Buddha. Karuna means, it has a multiple deep layered meaning. It goes what empathy we discussed. No, karuna in Buddhism goes much deeper, right? In fact, we need to take one entire lecture on talking about karuna. But the point what is this, which I want to tell you, is that we should love people. We should have emotions for everyone. We should not discriminate anyone. So this is what Buddhist philosophy is. Like, you see, there is another important, I don't know whether should I call it religion or whatever. Like, what I mean by Buddhism is a philosophy. I look Buddhism as a philosophy, not as a religion, right? Because I have very different understanding of religion, right? Religion, I particularly say that India does not have religion, it has a philosophy, right? So this is a different discussion, debate, we will discuss it in another point of time, but for time being, understand this: in the Buddhist philosophy, everyone has to be treated equally with love, emotions, care, right? And what they talk about more inclusivity. They talk about interdependence, not independence, right? In modern society, what we preach, oh, let's be independent, you are not supposed to ask help from anyone, you should do by your own self. This is a evil, this is a vice. How can you do this? What kind of society you are envisioning? What kind of society you are envisioning where people will remain independent? Independent doesn't mean that you are dependent on someone for everything. What I mean to say that you need each other, right? That's what life is all about. In fact, Martha Nussbaum, if I have to talk about the West, Martha Nussbaum talks extensively about interdependence, right? So interdependence is a virtue, it's not a vice, right? So we have to rethink, reinterpret this philosophy, this thinking to understand what they have to say about people with disability, right? So let's go to the next slide and see what Jainism has to speak about people with disability, right? So Jainism, like Buddhism, emphasizes the importance of non-violence and compassion. Jains believe in the interconnectedness of all beings and that disability, like any form of suffering, arise from accumulation of negative karma, right? So, however, Jainism also teaches that individuals can transcend their karmic limitations through strict adherence to the principle of non-violence, self-discipline and asceticism. So, they emphasize on the soul's journey toward liberation, suggest that disability as a part of one's karmic destiny is not to be stigmatized, but rather accepted as a part of the soul's evolutionary process, right? Here you see this philosophy of Jainism I am talking about. Jainism, so theme of Jainism is ahimsa, non-violence, right? They even do not want to hurt insects. Imagine, if I am sure that if we don't need to go much deeper, in fact, you can see the people of Jain when they walk on the path, they are very careful. Like, I mean, the practice what Jainists they do is a difficult, right? They carry the broom when they are walking on the road, so that what if when they are walking there are some insects which they can hurt. Obviously, it's a very difficult to practice. And they also use the mask, not the COVID mask, but generally they used to mask, so that what if there are germs, there are bacteria, they also have a life. Imagine to the extent they go, and they think that if you breathe, they can go into your nostril and they will be killed. So you are not supposed to do this, right? Imagine if Jainism believes in that kind of a philosophy, that kind of a thinking, and if they practice like this, how they can discriminate people with disabilities, how the treatment towards people with disability would be different, right? So this is another important religion which we practice in India. I am talking about that. The entire philosophy is soul's transformation. For them is more about different kind of a life, right? I am not saying that for them body is not important, but for them there is another thinking, there is another pattern of thinking where there is a focus on the soul's transformations. It is not about, they are not very particular about, and they are not very particular about people marked with differences or people marked without differences, right? So this is not what they practice, right? And this is why we need to go back and talk about it. And then we are talking about the karmic, right, in the karma and all that. So karma is basically, when we are referring to, is more about a way through which you can teach, right? This is how you can talk about, this is how you can discuss, you can live your life, you can envision your directions. So this is what very important when you are moving. It's not like karma ki, okay, so this karma is more about you have to live a life which is not harmful to anyone, right? Something like that. So we'll talk about karma maybe some other time, because karma has a philosophy, it's a different philosophy, right? Look at the next important religion. Next slide, if you see that. In the next slide, Sikhism is another major religious tradition in India, which emphasizes equality, humility, and service to others. So, Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, rejected the caste system and any form of social discrimination. Sikhism's commitment to social justice is reflected in the way it views people with disability, encouraging the community to accept and include individuals with all forms of physical and mental conditions. Sikh scriptures, particularly the Guru Granth Sahib, emphasizes the importance of devotion to God, let's say humility, service to others, regardless of their physical or mental state. So, disability is not seen as a barrier to spiritual progress, and the focus is placed on an inner devotion and service to humanity. Right? Think about the kind of deep philosophy these religions have. Right? Sikhism is talking about devotion to the God. Sikhism is talking about service to the God. Sikhism is talking about service to human being despite any difference. Right? So, imagine they are not particular about any religion, they are not particular about any caste, they are not particular about any culture, they are not particular anything. Then how can you think that religion that we have in India is more particular about people with disabilities, right? So, therefore, my dear students and friends, when I am talking about these things, make sure that you understand that religion does not discriminate anyone, it does not ask anyone to discriminate. So, look at the another slide please. So, disability in Indian religion is a multifaceted issue that encompasses theological, cultural and social dimension. Religious texts and iconography often portray disability as part of human condition, right. So, you can read this slide by yourself. So, ultimately the religious representation of disability in Indian tradition reflect a deep tension between exclusion, inclusion, suffering, transcendence, and the desire for a more compassionate, just society for all people, right. This is a point, right, regardless of their physical or mental conditions. So, to conclude my lecture, this particular lecture was extremely significant just to explain that how people with disabilities are represented, talked, and what are the important philosophy of different religions. So, I picked up just 4. I am sure that there are many more which I have not touched, but as I said, I am not like I cannot cover all the philosophies, right, or all the religions. So, please reread them, think about it. This is my perspective. I am sure that you will come up with your understanding. All right. So, read these religions in focus of different texts and see what they have more to say about society, about inclusion and all. So, thank you so much for listening to me and having your patience. See you. Take care.